In this video, we're going to talk about estimating square roots. And as we discussed in class, a square root is the opposite of squaring a number. So we know that if we square a number, we have something such as 5 to the second power, or 5 times itself, which is 25. So if I found the square root of 25, I would think to myself, what number times itself is 25? And that answer would be 5. We have what are called perfect squares, and those are the numbers that if I take their square root, my answer is an integer. And what you see here is a list of perfect squares all the way up to 16 squared. And these are really helpful to have memorized because as we get into estimating square roots, it becomes a lot easier if you have these in your head already. So when I have a square root problem and the number inside the square root problem is not a perfect square, that's when I would have to estimate my answer. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to draw myself a number line. So here's my number line. And I want to think, what two perfect squares does the square root of 7 sit between? So I know that 2 squared is 4. So the square root of 4 would be a little smaller than the square root of 7. And I know another perfect square, which is 9. And that would be a little larger than the square root of 4. So we're going to put the square root of 9 over here. Now if I solve the square root of 4, I know that it's 2 because 2 times 2 gives me 4. And if I solve the square root of 9, it's 3 because 3 times 3 gives me 9. Now if I think of breaking this number line down, if over here is 2 and over here is 3, then the midpoint on this number line would be 2.5. So let's see if we can kind of narrow down where the square root of 7 would sit. If I think of the distance between the square root of 7 and the square root of 4, there's a distance of 3. If I think of the difference between the square root of 7 and the square root of 9, there's only a difference of 2. So that tells me that my square root of 7 is going to sit somewhere in between 2.5 and 3. So I'm just going to draw the square root of 7 right here. Now, without a calculator, I have to start guessing and checking. So if it's somewhere between 2.5 and 3, maybe I'm going to guess 2.7 first. And what I would do is take my paper and pencil and say, all right, well, what's 2.7 squared? So I would do 2.7 times 2.7, and that's going to give me 7.29. Well, 7.29 is awfully close to 7, but it's a little above it. So let's see if we can get a little closer. So since 7.29 is a little larger, I'm going to guess what's 2.6 times 2.6. And that's going to give me 6.76. Also close to 7, but this time a little lower. So the question becomes, which of these two decimals is closer to 7? And if I had to pick one, I would have to say that the 6.76 is closer. So therefore, the square root of 7 can be estimated to be approximately, so I'm going to use my squiggly equal sign, so it's approximately 2.6. Let's look at another example. So this time I have the square root of 95. And again, I'm going to start off picturing this number on a number line. And I want to place it between two perfect squares that I know. So I know that the square root of 81 would be a perfect square. And there's another perfect square of 100. So that'll come over here. If I find the square root of 81, it's 9, because 9 times 9 is 81. If I find the square root of 100, it's 10, because 10 times 10 is 100. The midpoint between 9 and 10 would be 9.5. So I now want to determine which half of my number line would the square root of 95 fit in? So if I think of 95, the distance between 95 and 81, well, there's a difference of 14 numbers there. And then if I compare 95 to 100, there's only a difference of 4 numbers. So that tells me that my square root of 95 will sit someplace between 9.5 and 10. So we'll put it right here. Now that I've narrowed it down to numbers between 9.5 and 10, I'm going to guess and check a little bit. So my first guess is going to be 9.7, right in the middle. So 9.7 squared, or 9.7 times 9.7, gives me a product of 94.09. Now that's pretty close. It's a little lower than 95, so I'm going to take another guess. I'm going to go up 1/10 and find out 9.8 squared, or 9.8 times 9.8. And that's going to give me 96 4/4. So now I want to think to myself, which of these two products is closer to 95? So if I find the difference between 94.09 and 95, and the difference between 96.04 and 95, I know that 94.09 is closer. So therefore, I can say that the square root, or the approximate square root of 95, is about 9.7. And that is how we estimate square roots.